Hello.
Jacob's hand trembled slightly as he slid the phone across the table. It was a small, sleek device, the kind that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 secrets within its polished shell. He'd had it for weeks, hell, months now, and had agonized over the decision to finally confront Lisa and the others. But tonight, sitting across from her in this overpriced restaurant with its sterile lighting and whispering waiters, the decision felt irreversible. This was the moment. There was no turning back. Lisa's eyes flickered from the phone to his face, a mixture of confusion and curiosity etching her features. Her long, dark hair fell over her shoulder, as always, perfect and untouched. But tonight, the flawless image she'd so carefully curated seemed more like a mask than anything genuine. She took the phone, her fingers brushing the screen, and the quiet hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. Then, the silence shattered. The voice crackled from the phone's speaker, low and intimate. It was Amanda's voice, unmistakable in its teasing tone. Then, John's voice joined in, smooth, deep, and full of a kind of arrogance Jacob had always hated. "Are you sure they won't find out?" Amanda's voice was a sultry whisper. "No way. I've been careful," John replied. "The thing with Lisa, don't worry about her. We'll just keep this between us, like we always do. A little secret. I'll make sure she's distracted." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and thick. Lisa's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide, searching Jacob's face for any sign that this was some sort of sick joke. But he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on her with a sense of resignation that made her stomach churn. "They've been sleeping together." Jacob's voice was a low, guttural murmur, like a confession. "Behind our backs. For months. Maybe even longer." Lisa's face turned pale. She pressed her hand to her chest as though trying to still the beating of her heart. The phone screen still echoed John's voice, cold and indifferent as he spoke about their plans for a future together. How Amanda was going to leave her husband, and how he would break up with Lisa when the time was right. The truth was more twisted than Jacob had ever imagined, more convoluted than he'd ever feared. The affair wasn't just about betrayal. It was about a calculated, sinister plot. John and Amanda hadn't been careless. No, they had been planning this for months, weaving a web of lies and deceit with surgical precision. "I don't know what's worse," Lisa whispered, her voice breaking. "That they've been doing this behind our backs, or that they've been planning it. Every step of the way. They were just waiting for us to fall apart, weren't they?" Jacob nodded, the weight of his own shame crushing him. He had been blind, too. He had trusted John, had treated him like a brother. He'd been the one to introduce him to Amanda, the one to spend hours on the phone with him, discussing their work and families. And now, all of that trust felt like a cruel joke. Lisa's eyes flicked back to the phone. The recording was still playing. Amanda's voice sounded almost carefree now, as though she was discussing the weather, not the betrayal of her own family. "I'll tell Jacob when the time is right," Amanda said, her voice saccharine and sweet. "I'll tell him we've been drifting, that things haven't been right between us. He'll understand. He always does." Jacob's fingers clenched into fists beneath the table. The anger that burned through him wasn't just for the affair. It was for the way Amanda had made him feel like a fool. It was the lies, the manipulation, the way she had promised him everything, only to give it away to another man behind his back. Lisa's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I want them to know that I know. Right now." Jacob's gaze flicked over to the other side of the restaurant, where John and Amanda sat, laughing over their wine, completely unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. Lisa stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor, and Jacob could see the look in her eyes. Steely, resolute. She wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. "Come on," she said, her voice full of venom. "Let's do this." Jacob hesitated for only a moment before following her. He had no idea how things were going to unfold, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins made him feel like he could do anything. He had to make them feel the weight of their actions. They had no idea what was coming. As they approached the table, John's laugh faltered when he saw Lisa's expression. Amanda looked up slowly, her smile fading into confusion. "Hey, What's going on? Amanda asked, her voice light, but with an edge of concern. Lisa didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowing. Jacob took a deep breath, his throat tight, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "We need to talk," he said. John glanced at Amanda, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "About what?" "About the fact that I know everything," Jacob said, his voice colder than ice. "About you too. About the affair. About your plans." He turned the phone toward them, and the recording filled the space between them, its crackling sound like a funeral bell tolling. Amanda's face drained of color, her eyes darting between Jacob and Lisa. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, anything, but the words seemed to evaporate in her mouth. John, on the other hand, sat back, his chair scraping against the floor as he pushed himself away from the table. "You've got to be kidding me," John said, his voice rising. "You're really going to do this now? In front of everyone?" Lisa's eyes blazed with fury. "You think you can just keep lying and manipulating us? You thought you could walk away from this without consequences?" Her voice cracked, and the tears that had been threatening to spill finally began to fall. She didn't care anymore. Amanda's face twisted with anger, her false composure crumbling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Lisa. It just happened?" Lisa interrupted, her voice laced with bitterness. "I don't give a damn about your excuses. You knew exactly what you were doing." John stood up now, his face flushed with a mix of guilt and anger. "This is insane. You have no idea what you're talking about." But Jacob saw through it. He saw the desperation in John's eyes, the way his carefully constructed mask of confidence was slipping. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about control. It was about them thinking they could manipulate their way out of the mess they had created. "Then tell us, John," Jacob said, his voice dark and low. "How long were you planning on keeping this a secret?" Amanda looked at him, her expression shifting. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jacob." But Jacob didn't want to hear it. He didn't want her pity. He didn't want her to tell him what she thought would make it better. He wanted the truth. "We need to leave," he said to Lisa, his voice sharp. "Now." Lisa nodded, her face pale but resolute. Together, they turned their backs on Amanda and John, leaving the wreckage of their lives behind them, the whispers of the restaurant still echoing in their ears. But the betrayal wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a strange stillness in the air. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lisa hadn't spoken a word about what we'd done the night before, but I could feel the tension in her every movement, the way her eyes wouldn't quite meet mine as she moved around the kitchen, making coffee. It wasn't until the phone rang that I realized how quickly things were escalating. The caller ID flashed a name I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello? Mr. Jacobs?" The voice on the other end was sharp, formal. "This is Sandra from HR at Cortex Solutions. We've just received a very disturbing email regarding a serious issue with one of our senior managers." My heart sank. "Can you clarify?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've received explicit evidence of an affair involving one of our executives, John Taylor, with his colleague Amanda Richardson, who is currently employed in the marketing department. This email included audio recordings, personal conversations, and explicit details of their actions, all of which are contrary to the company's ethics policy. Do you have any knowledge of this matter?" The world felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was their entire professional lives. Everything they had worked so hard to build, being dismantled in a matter of hours. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of it. "Yes, I know exactly what's going on." I hung up without another word, the silence of the apartment filling the space around me. My mind raced, and then, just as quickly, a cold sense of satisfaction crept in. Lisa's plan had worked. She'd been meticulous, sending copies of all the evidence, emails, recordings, even photographs, to the respective companies. The email to Amanda's HR department was only the beginning. Lisa didn't stop at their work emails. She'd gone further. After gathering everything she could, she targeted their personal networks. John's business partners, Amanda's close friends, even the social circles they'd carefully maintained for years. The evidence wasn't just sent to their employers, it was out in the open, for everyone who knew them to see. By the time I picked up my phone again, my inbox was flooded with messages, each one a hammer blow to the facade Amanda and John had built around themselves. The company that Amanda worked for, one of the top marketing firms in the city, had issued a public statement suspending her while they launched an investigation. John's company had placed him on immediate leave, a suspension from his executive position until further notice. And then there was the phone call from John. His voice was high-pitched, desperate. "Jacob, what the hell is going on? Did you send this shit to my company? Are you insane?" I clenched my fists around the phone, my teeth grinding. The audacity of it. After everything, he was still trying to make it about me, about what I'd done. "No, John," I said, my voice low, controlled. "I didn't do this. You did. You and Amanda. You decided to break trust. You decided to betray everyone, and now you're asking me why this is happening? You don't get to ask for anything anymore." "That's not fair," he shouted, the sound of papers rustling in the background, like he was scrambling to fix the unfixable. "You think you're gonna ruin my career over this? You think you've won? I'll make this go away. I swear I'll." "You can't fix this, John. Not anymore." My words felt final, like a door slamming shut. "You've lost the right to ask for anything from me. You think you're the victim? You don't get to play that card. You burned every bridge you had." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a weak attempt at a laugh. "You really think you've won, don't you?" "I'm not trying to win anything," I said, my voice colder than ice. "This isn't a game. This is real life. And in real life, people who betray others don't get to walk away unscathed. Not without consequences." Another pause. Then, John's voice, softer, almost pleading. "Please, let me fix this, Jacob. I'll do anything. I'll talk to HR. I'll explain everything to you." "Enough." I cut him off, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "You lost the right to explain yourself when you chose to do this. You betrayed me, John. You betrayed us both. And now you're going to deal with the fallout. All of it." The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing there, staring at the phone in my hand. The silence in the apartment felt heavier now, the reality of the situation sinking in. Lisa had done it. She had taken control in a way I never could have imagined, and it had all come crashing down around John and Amanda. But there was something else in the back of my mind, something that made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the image of Amanda's face when she had seen the evidence in front of her, that moment of realization. The way she had looked at me, like she was still trying to find a way out, still hoping for a plea bargain. The more I thought about it, the more the anger boiled inside me. The lies they had spun, the way they'd looked me in the eye, pretending everything was fine. How had I not seen it? How had I let it go on for so long? And now Amanda, she thought she could waltz back in, beg for forgiveness, act like nothing had happened. She was still calling me, still trying to explain herself, but I wasn't listening anymore. I wasn't interested in her words. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I didn't answer the phone the next time she called, or the time after that. It didn't matter anymore. I had nothing left to say to her. She had destroyed everything, and there was no way back. A few days later, the full impact of what Lisa had done hit them. John was out of a job. Amanda, too. Their reputations, the carefully crafted images they had built in the professional world, were shattered. And I watched it unfold from a distance, like a spectator at a tragedy that they had written themselves into. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about making them suffer. It was about truth. They had lied, they had manipulated, and they had betrayed. And in the end, the truth was what had done them in. The silence in our apartment lingered a little longer, but it was different now. There was a weight lifted. I could breathe again. The air felt cleaner, free from the poison that had been slowly suffocating us all. Lisa didn't need to say anything. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know. We were still here, still standing. We had survived the storm together. But I knew one thing for certain, Amanda and John, they were done. The days after the restaurant incident passed like a slow-motion train wreck. I could feel the heaviness of what had happened settling into the bones of my life, as if everything had been rearranged, just slightly off kilter. The phone calls, the messages, the news, it all blended together into a blur of consequences. Lisa and I had made our decisions, and now there was no going back. The first sign that things were truly unraveling came with a call from John's company. It wasn't long after the suspension. A voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, but I could hear the tension in the words. "Mr. Jacobs?" The voice was from a senior HR officer. "This is Alan from the legal and compliance team at Sterling and Weaver Consulting. We've started a formal investigation into the allegations of misconduct involving Mr. John Taylor. We'll need your cooperation." At first, I wasn't sure how I was supposed to respond. I had already made my position clear, hadn't I? I didn't care about their investigation. John had betrayed me, and I wasn't interested in playing nice. But then I realized this wasn't about my feelings anymore. This was bigger. This was about John's career, his entire life, crumbling in real time. They sent over documents requesting all sorts of information. They wanted details about his activities at work, about the hours he'd been keeping, about his performance over the last year. It felt invasive, like they were trying to piece together the wreckage of a man's life with cold, corporate precision. Still, I complied. They needed proof, and I had it all. In the days that followed, I found myself in a strange place, somewhere between being the betrayed husband and a reluctant witness in their corporate nightmare. John's fall from grace didn't take long. As the investigation deepened, the company dug into his records, pulling up things they shouldn't have had to look for. First, they discovered discrepancies in his expense reports. There were thousands of dollars in charges for business dinners that had nothing to do with work. Hotel stays, flights, and meals at upscale restaurants, all expenses that had been justified as business-related, but none of it had any connection to his actual work. All of it was tied directly to the affair. The receipts from his trips with Amanda, trips they had conveniently booked under company funds, stood out like a neon sign. They had stayed in luxury hotels, taken private jets, dined at places that catered to the elite. It was the kind of lifestyle John had never been able to afford on his own salary. But Amanda's presence in the picture made it all make sense. He'd been using company money to cover their secret trips, their weekends away, the nights spent in the sort of hotels that had the kind of privacy you couldn't find in any regular establishment. The more they found, the worse it got. The final blow came when they discovered a series of messages he'd sent to Amanda through his work phone. Messages that were incredibly unprofessional, to put it mildly. Jokes about their getaways, flirtations hidden behind layers of corporate jargon. There were pictures, too. Pictures of the two of them together, unashamed of what they were doing, as if they thought the world would never find out. By the time John received his official meeting with HR, it was clear what was coming. His career was over. The company had gathered everything they needed, and they weren't going to let him off the hook. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt as I read through the reports that leaked out from the company. The investigations weren't just a formality, they were a death sentence for John. The company was ruthless when it came to preserving its reputation, and John had done irreparable damage to his own image. The reprimands that followed were brutal. In his termination letter, the language was sharp. They accused him of gross negligence, misuse of company funds, and unethical conduct. They even included the details of his relationship with Amanda in the official records, making it clear that they didn't care about the personal drama. It was the breach of trust with the company that mattered. For a man like John, a man who had spent years building his career, the fall was swift and devastating. I imagined him sitting in that office, his face pale, as they went over every single mistake he'd made, the threads of his deceit unraveling in front of his eyes. But what struck me the hardest was something I hadn't anticipated: how disconnected he seemed from the consequences. When I saw him a few days later, he wasn't angry, not in the way I had expected. There was no rage, no desperate pleading for forgiveness. It was as if he had already accepted the loss, like he'd given up before the final blow had even landed. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, resigned. I hadn't seen him in person since the night at the restaurant, and something about the way he stood there in front of me, shrunken, deflated, felt wrong. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if all the confidence and bravado that had once defined him had been stripped away. "I'm not here to ask for anything, Jacob," he said, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm not the same person I was before this." I didn't know how to respond. I had spent months building up anger and resentment, and now, standing face to face with him, I didn't know whether I felt sorry for him or if I still hated him. The betrayal had been so deep, so calculated. But now, seeing him standing there, stripped of everything, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. "You really think that's going to change anything?" I said, the bitterness seeping through my voice. "You lost everything, John. You don't get to ask for forgiveness, not from me, not from anyone. You did this." "I know," he said quietly, "but it wasn't supposed to go like this. I didn't mean for everything to fall apart." "Doesn't matter," I replied. "You made your choices, and now you'll have to live with them." The air between us was thick with regret, but there was no sympathy in my chest. I wasn't going to pity him, not after everything he had done. He had made his bed with Amanda, and now it was time for him to lie in it, alone. The reality of the situation was sinking in for him, and though I didn't want to admit it, I knew there was no coming back for him, not in the same way. His career was over, and the company's investigation had made sure that his professional reputation was tarnished beyond repair. But what struck me most was that it wasn't just his career that had been destroyed. It was his integrity, his self-respect, his entire identity. He had betrayed me, yes, but more than that, he had betrayed himself. As I walked away from that meeting, I couldn't help but think about how far John had fallen. Once, he had been the man who had it all, the perfect life, the perfect career, the respect of everyone around him. And now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale, someone whose flaws had caught up with him in the most public and humiliating way possible. The investigation, the reprimands, the termination, all of it was just the beginning. The damage was done, and there was no way for him to undo what he had broken. The fallout from Amanda's betrayal hit harder than I ever could have imagined, not just for John, but for her as well. The moment her colleagues found out about the affair, thanks to the leak I hadn't even expected, everything changed. She thought she could keep the perfect image of a high-powered, successful woman, but now it was all out in the open, and there was nowhere to hide. I remember the first time I saw her after the storm broke. It was a week after the investigation into John's company had made headlines. The office whispers had grown into full-blown rumors by then, and it wasn't just about her relationship with him anymore. It was about the lies she'd told, the trust she'd broken, and how she'd used her position at work to cover it all up. Her name was tarnished. It was like a cloud of shame had descended on her, and there was no escaping it. I saw her walking into the building one morning, head down, shoulders hunched, looking like a ghost of the woman I once knew. The usual confidence that had radiated from her was gone, replaced by something almost fragile. She looked smaller, diminished. The quiet, empty way she walked told me everything I needed to know. She knew the damage had been done, but it wasn't just her career that was on the line. Amanda was losing her friends too, something I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the company's scandalous investigation that ruined her. It was the way her actions had infected every part of her life. The people she had trusted, the colleagues she had once been close with. Her team had turned their backs on her long before I did. I had been so focused on my own sense of betrayal that I hadn't thought about what was happening to her professionally. Her best friend at work, Mira, someone Amanda had leaned on for years, was the first to confront her. The woman had always been a quiet observer, but when the truth came out, she was relentless. "I can't believe you did this," Mira had said one afternoon, her voice shaking with disbelief. The confrontation had happened in the office, away from prying eyes, but I could imagine the tension in the air. Amanda had tried to explain. I could see that, but there was no excuse for what she had done. Mira didn't want to hear it. Her words had been cutting, as though she was speaking more to herself than to Amanda. "You had everything," Mira had spat. "You had a career, respect, a future, and you threw it all away for him? For a stupid affair? You lied to all of us." Amanda's face had been pale, her eyes wide with shock, as if she still couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of what she had done. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mira didn't let her. You thought you could play with people's lives and get away with it, Mira had continued, her voice trembling with anger. And now look at you. You've destroyed your reputation. You've ruined everything. And for what? So you could feel special for a little while? Amanda had stepped back, as though the words physically hurt. But Mira didn't stop. You've made your bed, Amanda. Don't expect any of us to help you lie in it. The harsh words had left a mark. Amanda was no longer welcome in the office. Her colleagues, those who had once respected her, had turned their backs on her. No one wanted to work with her anymore. Gossip spread like wildfire, and it didn't take long for Amanda to become a pariah in the very world she had worked so hard to build. People stopped inviting her to meetings, stopped responding to her emails. Her once promising career was in freefall. By the time I saw her again, it was no longer the woman I had known. Her eyes were sunken, her face drawn and tired. The confidence she had once carried like armor was now completely gone, and in its place was a woman who seemed lost, someone who had been forced to reckon with the full weight of her choices. She tried to speak to me, of course, after everything that had happened. There was a part of me that thought maybe, just maybe, she might feel some remorse. But the truth was, I wasn't interested in hearing her side of things anymore. I didn't care about her apologies or her explanations. What she had done, what she had allowed herself to become, was unforgivable. You've ruined your career, Amanda, I said the last time I saw her, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be, but full of finality. Everything you built, everything you had, it's gone now. And it's not just because of John. It's because of you. You chose this. She looked like she wanted to say something, but all she did was nod slowly, like she was finally starting to understand the depth of the situation. I could see it then, the guilt in her eyes, the way she carried it with her now. It wasn't an excuse, but it was something that had changed her. She wasn't the same woman who had betrayed me. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Her career was ruined. The company had officially severed ties with her, and no one at the firm seemed willing to stand by her. Her colleagues saw her for what she had become, a liar, a cheat, someone who couldn't be trusted. Even Mira, the person who had once been her closest ally, was now bitter, every word they exchanged laced with resentment. The last time I saw them together in the office, Mira didn't even look at Amanda. She didn't even acknowledge her presence. It was clear now that Amanda had burned all the bridges she had so carefully built over the years. What she had thought was a temporary distraction, a fling, a secret affair, had turned into a career-ending scandal. She wasn't just losing her job, she was losing her identity. No one cared about the excuses anymore. No one cared about her side of the story. What mattered was the truth that had been revealed, the truth about her dishonesty, her selfishness, and the choices she had made that had now cost her everything. Her phone didn't ring with work calls anymore. Invitations to important meetings stopped coming. Her inbox, once full of congratulatory emails and requests for her expertise, was now silent. And then came the final blow, a resignation letter she was forced to write herself. In a rare moment of corporate mercy, they hadn't fired her outright. Instead, they allowed her to resign to save face. But it wasn't much better. It felt like a public shaming, an admission of guilt without ever having to face the consequences head-on. The last time I saw her in public, she was standing outside a cafe, holding a coffee cup in her hands. She didn't notice me at first, and I didn't want to approach her. It was strange, seeing her like that, so different from the woman I had once known. The confident, sharp, polished Amanda was gone. In her place was someone who looked lost, someone who didn't seem to know where to turn next. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest part. Watching her lose herself. Watching her crumble under the weight of the lies she had told. Because it wasn't just her career that had fallen apart. It was everything she had built her life around. All of it, destroyed. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching her suffer. It was about the fact that the consequences of her actions weren't just about losing her job. They were about losing everything that had made her who she was. And in that, I found no satisfaction. Only a strange, empty feeling of inevitability. The truth always comes out. And when it does, you have to face the fallout. The final blow came swiftly for John and Amanda. After the investigation into their affairs and fraudulent activities, there was no way back. The company didn't waste any time. They terminated them both. The formal announcement came on a Thursday afternoon, a slap to the face that was so public, so brutal, it almost felt like something out of a movie. I saw it in the news the next day. Sterling and Weaver Consulting cleans house amid financial fraud scandal. Their names were front and center, labeled as the cause of a massive corporate scandal that involved misused funds, falsified expense reports, and personal misconduct. The media picked up the story quickly, and once the articles began to circulate, it was like a wildfire, spreading beyond the office, to the social circles they had once moved in, to their friends, their colleagues. John and Amanda's names became synonymous with betrayal, dishonesty, and financial corruption. The weight of their actions was being felt in every part of their lives. What had been a comfortable, almost invincible existence, built on secrets and lies, was now nothing more than ash. Their reputations, both at work and outside of it, were completely destroyed. I watched it unfold with a sense of detached satisfaction. I had no sympathy for them. Watching them crumble under the weight of their own deceit wasn't a victory for me. It was just the inevitable result of their choices. The consequences were always going to catch up to them, no matter how much they had tried to cover it up or lie their way out of it. The hardest part for me, though, was still the aftermath of our marriage. Signing the divorce papers felt like the last thing I had to do to sever the ties between us. It was done. The betrayal was done. There was no room left for doubt, no chance for reconciliation. I had learned everything I needed to know about her, and I wasn't going to waste another moment on someone who had so easily turned her back on me. When I signed those papers, it wasn't out of anger anymore. It was out of necessity. I had to move on, to rebuild. And in a way, it was a kind of freedom, though not the kind I would have expected. There was no joy in it, but there was relief. Relief in knowing that I was no longer shackled to a past that had been filled with lies. The days that followed felt strange. I had never been in this position before. I had spent so much of my life working hard to build something stable, something I could be proud of. But now that was gone. My marriage, my life as I had known it. So, what next? In the midst of it all, I found myself reconnecting with Mira. She had always been a steady presence in my life, someone I could rely on when things were tough. She had been a good friend to both Amanda and me, and in the wake of everything that had happened, she hadn't turned her back on me. In fact, she'd been there for me in ways I hadn't expected. It started with casual meetings, cups of coffee at the same cafe where we had sat years ago, just talking, catching up. But as the weeks passed, I started to lean on her more. She understood what I was going through, better than anyone else, and she was always there to listen, to offer advice. And then, it became more. One afternoon, as we sat at the cafe once again, Mira turned to me with an idea. It was simple at first, an idea to create something new, something honest, something built from the ground up. "We've both been through hell lately," she said, her eyes steady, as if she had been thinking about it for a while. "But you're good at what you do, Jacob, and I know I'm good at what I do. We could start something new, something better. We could build a company that actually means something." I wasn't sure what to say at first. The idea seemed too far-fetched, too risky. After everything that had happened, starting over didn't feel like something I was ready for. But Myra's belief in it was infectious. She saw potential. She saw the possibility of something greater. And as we talked more, the idea began to take root in my mind. The business idea we came up with was simple but powerful. It was based on ethics, on doing things the right way, on building relationships founded on honesty, integrity, and transparency. We wanted to create a consulting company, one that focused on helping businesses build sustainable practices while maintaining the highest standards of ethics. We knew there was a market for it. There were companies out there looking for change, wanting to leave behind the toxic culture of dishonesty that had come to define the corporate world. And we thought, why not us? We started small, working out of my apartment at first, doing everything ourselves. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. And we were building it the right way. No shortcuts, no lies. Just hard work, honesty, and the kind of integrity I hadn't found in my previous life. What I hadn't expected was how natural it felt to work with Mira. We made a good team. She was sharp, focused, and had a level-headed approach to everything. I brought the strategy and vision, while she handled the details, the day-to-day operations. It worked. And as we started landing clients, as the business began to grow, I realized that I had not only found a business partner in Mira, I had found something deeper. As our business flourished, our relationship grew stronger, too. It started with small gestures, lunches together, late-night brainstorming sessions that stretched into hours, quiet conversations about the future we were building. It wasn't long before we both admitted that there was something more between us. It wasn't just business anymore. It was life. It felt like the universe had given me a second chance, but this time, it wasn't just about rebuilding my career. It was about rebuilding myself. And Mira was right there with me, supporting me, pushing me, believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. We became partners in every sense of the word. We were a team, not just in business, but in life. As we grew our company, we grew closer. Our values aligned, and the more success we had, the more we realized that we had something worth holding on to. We had built this life from the ground up, together, with nothing but hard work and the kind of honesty that had been missing in every other part of my life. It was slow at first, but it was real. Every deal, every contract, every client we worked with, I knew we were doing it the right way. And that felt better than any success I had ever achieved in the past. Mira and I knew what we had was rare. This connection between us, this partnership, this trust. We didn't take it for granted. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about building a future together, something that was based on mutual respect and a shared vision. As I looked back on everything that had happened, on the wreckage of my past, I realized that in rebuilding my life, I had found something better than I had ever imagined. A new career, a new beginning, a new love, and it felt good. So good.
Good boy.